The coast of Dumnonia looked so green. I had not realized how much I loved the place till first I left it. My men travelled in 3 ships, all rowed by slaves, though once we were out of the river a wind came from the west and the oars were shipped as the ragged sails dragged the clumsy ships down the long waves' swooping sides. Many of my men were sick. They were young, mostly younger than myself, for war is truly a boy's game, but a few were older. Cavan, who was my second in command, was close to 40, and had a grizzled beard and a face cross-hatched with scars. He was a dour Irishman who had taken service with Uther, and who now found nothing strange in being commanded by a man only half his age. He called me Lord, assuming that, because I came from the Tor, I was Merlin's heir, or at least the magician's lordly child whelped on a Saxon slave. Arthur had given me Cavan, I think, in case my authority should prove no greater than my years, but in all honesty, I never had trouble commanding men. You tell soldiers what they must do it yourself, punish them when they fail, but otherwise reward them well and give them victory. My spearmen were all volunteers, and were going to Benwick either because they wanted to serve me, or, more likely, because they believed there would be greater plunder and glory south of the sea. We travelled without women, horses, or servants. I had given Canna her freedom and sent her to the Tor, hoping Numui would look after her, but I doubted I would see my little Saxon again. She would find herself a husband soon enough, while I would find the new Brittany, and see for myself the fabled beauty of Innistribes. Blethig, the chief sent by King Ban, travelled with us. He grumbled at my lack of years, but after Cavan growled that I had probably killed more men than Blethig himself, Blethig decided to keep his reservations about me private. He still complained that our numbers were too few. The Franks, he said, were land-hungry, well-armed and numerous. 200 men, he now claimed, might make a difference, but not 60. We anchored that first night in the bay of an island. The seas roared past the bay's mouth, while on the shore a ragged band of men shouted at us, and sometimes fired feeble arrows that fell far short of our 3 ships. Our shipmaster feared a storm was coming, and he sacrificed a kid that was on board for just that purpose. He drizzled the dying animal's blood on the bow of his ship, and by morning the winds had calmed, though a great fog had crept over the sea instead. None of the ship's captains would sail in the fog, so we waited a full day and night, and then, under a clear sky, rowed southwards. It was a long day. We skirted some dreadful rocks that were crowned with the bones of ships that had foundered, and then, in a warm evening, with a small wind and a rising tide helping our tired rowers, we slid into a wide river, where, beneath the lucky wings of a flight of swans, we beached our craft. There was a fort nearby, and armed men came to the river-bank to challenge us, but Blethig shouted that we were friends. The men called back in British, welcoming us. The setting sun was gilding the river's swirls and eddies. The place smelt of fish and salt and tar. Black nets hung on racks beside beached fishing boats. Fires blazed under the salt pans, dogs ran in and out of the small waves, barking at us, and a group of children came from some nearby huts to watch as we splashed ashore. I went first, carrying my shield with its symbol of Arthur's bear upside down, and when I had gone beyond the wrack-littered line of the high tide, I plunged the butt of my spear into the sand and said a prayer to Bel, my protector, and to Manawyddan, the sea god, that one day they would float me back from Armorica, back to my lord's side, back to Arthur in blessed Britain. And then we went to war. I have heard men say that no town, Not even Rome or Jerusalem was as beautiful as Innistribes. And maybe those men spoke true, for though I never saw those others, I did see Innistribes, and it was a place of marvels, a wondrous town, the most beautiful place I ever saw. It was built on a steep granite island, set in a wide and shallow bay that could be riven with foam and howling with wind, yet inside Innistribes all would be calm. In summer the bay would shimmer with heat, but inside Benwick's capital it always seemed cool. Guinevere would have loved Innistribes, for everything old was treasured, and nothing ugly was allowed to mar its grace. The Romans had been to Innistribes, of course, but they had not fortified it, only built a pair of villas on its summit. The villas were still there. King Ban and Queen Elaine had joined them together, and then added to them by pillaging Roman buildings on the mainland for new pillars and pedestals, mosaics and statues, so that the island's summit was now crowned with an airy palace, full of light, where white linen curtains billowed with every breath of wind that gusted off the glittering sea. The island was best reached by boat, though there was a causeway of sorts that was covered by every high tide, and at low tide could become treacherous with quicksands. Withies marked the causeway, but the surge of the bay's huge tides washed the markers away, and only a fool attempted the passage without hiring the services of a local guide to steer him through the sucking sands and trembling creeks. At the lowest tides, Innistribes would emerge from the sea to stand amidst a wilderness of rippled sand, cut through with gullies and tide pools, while at the highest tides, when the wind blew strong from the west, the city was like some monstrous ship crashing her dauntless way through tumultuous seas. Beneath the palace was a huddle of lesser buildings that clung to the steep granite slopes like seabirds' nests. There were temples, shops, churches, and houses, all lime-washed, all built of stone, all tricked out with whatever carvings and decorations had not been wanted in Ban's high palace, and all fronting onto the stone-paved road that climbed in steps around the steep island towards the royal house. There was a small stone quay on the island's eastern side, where boats could land, though only in the calmest weather was the landing comfortable, which was why our ships had landed us at a safe place a day's march to the west. Beyond the quay was a small harbour, which was nothing but a tidal pool protected by sandbanks. At low tide the pool was cut off from the sea, while at the tide's height the holding was poor whenever the wind was in the north. All around the island's base, except in those places where the granite itself was too steep to climb, a stone wall tried to keep the outer world at bay. Outside Innistribes was turmoil, Frankish enemies, blood, poverty and disease, while inside the wall lay learning, music, poetry, and beauty. I did not belong in King Ban's beloved island capital. My task was to defend Innistribes by fighting on the mainland of Benwick, where the Franks were pushing into the farmlands that supported the lavish capital. But Blethig insisted I met the king, so I was guided across the causeway, through the city gate that was decorated with a carved merman brandishing a trident, and up the steep road that led to the lofty palace. My men had all stayed on the mainland, and I wished I had brought them to see the wonders of the city. The carved gates, the steep stone stairs that plunged up and down the granite island between the temples and shops, the balconied houses decorated with urns of flowers, the statues, and the springs that poured clean fresh water into carved marble troughs where anyone could dip a pail or stoop to drink. Blethig was my guide, and he growled how the city was a waste of good money that should have been spent on defences ashore. But I was awestruck. This, I thought, was a place worth fighting for. Blethig led me through the final Merlin-decorated gate into the palace courtyard. The palace's vine-clad buildings filled 3 sides of the court, while the 4th was bounded by a series of white-painted arches that opened onto a long view of the sea. Guards in white cloaks stood at every door, their spear shafts polished and spearheads shining. "They're no earthly use," Blethig muttered to me. "Couldn't fight off a puppy, but they look pretty." A courtier in a white toga met us at the palace door and escorted us through room after room, each one filled with rare treasures. There were alabaster statues, golden dishes, and a room lined with speculum mirrors that made me gasp as I saw myself reflected into an unending distance. A bearded, dirty, russet-cloaked soldier, getting ever smaller in the mirror's crinkling diminutions. In the next room, which was painted white and was filled with the scent of flowers, a girl played a harp. She wore a short tunic and nothing else. She smiled as we passed and went on playing. Her breasts were golden from the sun, her hair was short and her smile easy. "Looks like a whorehouse," Blethig confided in a hoarse whisper. "And I wish it was. It might be of some use then." The toga-clad courtier thrust open the last pair of bronze-handled doors and bowed us into a wide room that overlooked the glittering sea. "Lord King," he bowed to the room's only occupant, "Chief Blethig and Derval, a captain of Domnonia." A tall, thin man with a worried face and a thinning head of white hair stood up from behind a table where he had been writing on parchment. A cat's paw of wind stirred his work, and he fussed until he had weighted the parchment's corners with inkhorns and snakestones. "Ah, Blethig," the king said as he advanced towards us. "You're back, I see. Good, good. Some people never come back. The ships don't survive. We should ponder that. Is the answer bigger ships, do you think? Or do we build them wrong? I'm not sure we have the proper boat-building skills, though our fishermen swear we do. But some of them never come back either. A problem." King Ban stopped halfway across the room and scratched his temple, transferring yet more ink onto his sparse hair. "No immediate solution suggests itself," he finally announced, then peered at me. "Drivel, is it?" "Derval, Lord King," I said, dropping to one knee. "Derval." He said my name with astonishment. "Derval? Let me think now. Derval. I suppose if that name means anything, it means pertaining to a druid. Do you so pertain, Derval?" "I was reared by Merlin, Lord." "Were you? Were you indeed? My, that is something. I see we must talk. How is my dear Merlin?" "He hasn't been seen these 5 years, Lord." "So? He's invisible? Huh? I always thought that might be one of his tricks. A useful one, too. I must ask my wise men to investigate. Do stand up, do stand up. I can't abide people kneeling to me. I'm not a god. At least I don't think I am." The king inspected me as I stood up, and seemed disappointed by what he saw. "Oh, you look like a Frank," he observed in a puzzled voice. "I am a Domnonian, Lord King," I said proudly. "I'm sure you are. And a Domnonian, I pray, who precedes dear Arthur, yes?" he asked eagerly. I had not been looking forward to this moment. "No, Lord," I said. "Arthur is besieged by many enemies. He fights for our kingdom's existence, and so he has sent me and a few men, all we can spare, and I am to write and tell him if more are needed." "More will be needed, indeed they will," Ban said as fiercely as his thin, high-pitched voice allowed. "Dear me, yes. So you've brought a few men, have you? How few, pray, is few, precisely?" 60, Lord."